Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dyslexia Life Hacks Show. I'm your host, Matthew Head. And in this episode, I'm talking to Sarah Templeton. She runs a charity, ADHD Liberty, which is one of the first in the UK to screen for ADHD, dyslexia, and other neurodiversity in various police stations. She's written a few books with the interesting titles of How Not to Murder Your ADHD Kid and Teaches How Not to Kill the Spirit of Your ADHD Kid. I will put links to her books, website, and various other work she's done in the show notes, which will be available at dyslexialifehacks.com/podcast. Welcome to the show, Sarah.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
No problem at all. Where I thought I'd kick this episode off with today is that I was skimming through your profile and realised that at 52 was when you got officially diagnosed with ADHD.
Pretty much. It was a month before, 6 weeks before. So I got diagnosed on the 15th of March. And turned 52 on the 2nd of June. So I've got Dyscalculia, so do your maths there, but I think it's about 6 weeks. So but that was just ADHD, and that was what I thought explained my life, but it didn't, because I carried on. I was a counsellor. The same year I was diagnosed ADHD, 2015, was the same year that I qualified as a counsellor. So I then started to see clients with ADHD, and then they started to talk to me about all these different conditions and comorbidities, which I'd never even heard that word until 2015. So they started to talk to me about all these conditions they've got. And I thought, well, hang on, I do this. I do all this. And actually, I do quite a lot more. So I then did my own research and did my own private referrals. Obviously, didn't get any of this on the NHS. But I then got diagnosed with, and this really explained my life, I got diagnosed with severe dyspraxia with 1% processing and 1% motor skills. Quite how I've managed to survive the day, I don't know. Dyscalculia, which I hadn't even heard of, just thought it was a bit rubbish in numbers. And also sensory processing disorder, which was no surprise because I now know that roughly 8 or 9 people out of 10 with ADHD have also got sensory processing disorder. So that one wasn't a big surprise. But the dyscalculia was, and the severe dyspraxia, that shocked me to the core. Because when she said 1% processing and 1% motor skills, I was like, bloody hell, how have I managed to survive? But so that kind of was, by the time I was 56, I had the full package. I had the ADHD and the 3 comorbidities, and that explained the whole picture. And that is one of the reasons why I am so passionate, which we'll no doubt talk about in a minute. I'm so passionate about kids getting all these right diagnoses when they are young, so that they understand themselves. They don't hate themselves like I hated myself for a lot of the things I did. I really hated myself for it. I don't want these kids to hate themselves for it. I want them to understand what they've been born with, what they've got, the big positives and joys that a lot of these things bring, but also to be able to deal with the negatives or the challenges is probably a better way of putting it, because these conditions do bring challenges, particularly dyspraxia. I've spoken to a lot of people with a lot of conditions over these years, and it's dyspraxia that actually don't bring anything positive with it at all. It just brings a lot of broken bones. It brings a lot of knocks and bangs and bruises. It brings difficulties, and we've yet to find, all of us lovely dyspraxics, and I've met a few of us now, we've yet to find a positive in dyspraxia. We can find positives in the other things, though. And I want children, especially offenders is another group I'm massively compassionate about, and we'll talk about them later. But kids, they should not have to wait until they're 52 or 51 and a counsellor leapt on me and said, I think you're ADHD because you're not shut up for 3 hours. You shouldn't have to wait that long. She's lovely and I love her. But, if she hadn't have said that, and then also what's also shocking is when she had said that, I went to my GP. He knocked me back with these exact words: there is no money in the NHS for adult ADHD. So I went back to her. She said, go again, see somebody else.
Yeah,
saw somebody else. He said the exact word. They'd obviously begin the script. Same words. There's no money in the NHS for adult ADHD. So I then approached a private psychiatrist, but I got a bit savvy by then. And I had typed out 4 A4 sheets of what I thought were ADHD traits. Sent them to this psychiatrist in the post, and he rang me up the night before and he said, don't bother coming. It's very obvious you're ADHD. What's your GP playing about? So the wrote to my GP, and all of a sudden there was money in the NHS for adult ADHD, and surprise, surprise, I was referred. At the time, I was living in Poole. For people who know Poole and Dorset, there's 5 miles between the two. I was living in Poole and I was referred to an adult ADHD specialist psychiatrist between Poole and Bournemouth. So literally 2 miles up the road on the NHS. So, work that one out. There he was sitting there. That was his full-time job. Yet I'd been told there's no money in the NHS for adult ADHD.
Yes, helpful as always.
And had it not been for this counsellor who every single time I went back to her and said, I'm not ADHD, because she went, I'm sorry, you are, go somewhere else. And she kept literally telling me, go somewhere else, you are. If she hadn't been so sure of herself, I would have definitely given up. Definitely. Because these professionals were saying, no, you're not, and even the chap between Poole and Bournemouth, when I walked in, the very first words he said to me after I said hello and he said hello, the very first words he said to me was, well, I don't think you've got ADHD. That was the first thing he said. Honestly, the first thing he said. So, and bearing in mind, I couldn't fit into size 26 clothes at the times. I was a big girl. There was a bit of compulsive eating going on there, or at least. He literally said, I don't think you've got ADHD. And I literally exasperatedly said, would you please just take a look at these notes that I've written? He read the first page, flicked over to the top of the second and said, oh, well, yeah, all right, you have got ADHD. And that was how I got my diagnosis.
But how did he have that assumption the moment you walked in the door? Like,
God knows. The only thing I can assume...
don't walk like somebody with ADHD? How can you make that as assessment as a profession?
Well, as I say, I was a very large girl. I'm still not small. I'm a size 14, 16 now. I'm not minute. But at the time, I couldn't get into size 26 clothes, I was a big girl. So for him to have just looked at me and said that, I don't know, I'd actually quite like to go and sit in front of him again and just say, do you realise how appalling that was? You didn't even let me get more than one sentence out, and that sentence was, hello, pleased to meet you, I think it was, before you said, well, I don't think you've got ADHD. Now, the only thing I can potentially link it with, this was a hospital, and they did deal with a lot of people who had what at the time was still called borderline personality disorder, what is now called emotionally unstable personality disorder. So there are a lot of people like that sitting in reception. And a lot of these people, they are not all, but some self-harm. And I think because I went in as a businesswoman who was married, had been married for 10 years, ran a business, owned 2 properties, was relatively successful and wasn't on benefits, crying, dreadful self-harm scars, all that sort of thing. Perhaps he decided that I didn't fit in with his clientele because I didn't look like that. I truly don't know. But I know it was very wrong because I've met hundreds of people since who look like me and who've got ADHD, and they'd have been told the same by him.
Yes, helpful. Very helpful. But you said, once you got the full suite of diagnosis with not just the ADHD, dyspraxia and everything else the things in your life sort of snapped together. Now, looking sort of turning the clock back and looking back on various things in your life, what sort of things do you think, that explains that, and that? What sort of particular moment?
Shall we start with the biggie?
Go on then.
The real biggie is why I failed my 12 plus. Now, I was in a class at junior school, a very good junior school. And of the 31 people in that class, 16 of them passed and went to the grammar school and 15 didn't. In class exams every year, I was always in the top 10. I was either I was 4th, 8th, 10th twice, and I think the lowest I ever was 11 out of the top 16. I should have gone to the grammar school, However, the 12 plus was full of problems, as in Rosie's got 3 grapes and 4 bananas. Jeff has got 6 bananas and 8 grapes. How many grapes has Gerald got? Now, I don't know if you know this, but a dyscalculia brain cannot work out problems. So when I was answering that, I was quite a bright girl. I loved English, loved learning. I was a big sponge back in those days. I still am, actually. I love learning anything new. And I just looked at these questions and thought, how ridiculous. Please, God, ask me something faintly, stimulating that's going to stimulate my brain. So I wrote down random numbers because what I didn't know at the time was brains with dyscalculia don't even attempt to work out problems. It's not that we even go so far and then get it wrong. Our brain won't go there. So I wrote numbers down like 300, 426, 8 million, -2. I just randomly wrote numbers all over this thing. When the results came through, the headmaster, before they were even put out to the public, the headmaster appealed it because he said I should go to the grammar school. Then when the results came out, my mother appealed it. Now, at that point, they were both told she has failed so spectacularly. That was the education department's words. She's failed so spectacularly, we can't possibly put her through. So off I get sent to the really rubbish secondary school. This is the bullet point version of the story. At the end of the first year, when I'd come first in maths out of 132 and first in English out of 132, unbeknownst to me, the headmistress rang my mother and said, this child shouldn't be at this school. She should be at the grammar school. Now, my mum didn't tell me this until my 16th birthday.
Oh.
I know. She left me at that dreadful secondary school. But the reason for it was when they sent her the school uniform list, it was chock-a-block with lacrosse sticks and hockey sticks and tennis rackets and all this. And my mum couldn't afford it. She just literally a year before forked out for all this new school uniform for the secondary modern, couldn't afford it for the grammar school. So rather than disappoint me, chose not to tell me till I was 16. So I spent 4 years at a dreadful, and I mean dreadful, secondary school. When I joined it in my form room, there were 5 fifth years and 3 of them were heavily pregnant. So it was all about getting pregnant and getting a boy by the time you were 13. That was what that school was all about. And I was bored stupid for 4 years. So the biggest impact for me, I mean, there's hundreds of little ones I could give you, but the biggest impact for me has been on my education. Because if somebody had known I had ADHD and somebody had worked out I had dyscalculia, I would have been given different papers to demonstrate my understanding, intelligence, whatever you want to call it. And I would have gone to that grammar school. And we have an extremely good grammar school in this area. It's one of the best in the country. And I was given a place at it a year late, but we couldn't afford the school uniform because, as I say, my mum had just forked out the whole of the new one the year before. And I therefore spent 3 years at a dreadful, dreadful secondary school where I never, ever got back to learning as well as I had when I was 11 and 12, because I was at a very, very good junior school. So that undiagnosed ADHD and undiagnosed dyscalculia, that screwed up my education. And what I always say to people now is that was in 1975. That was the year I took my 12 plus, 1975. Wouldn't it be wonderful to say, well, that doesn't happen anymore. We've got all that sorted out. We're screening children for all these conditions. They're all being diagnosed. They're all being rubbish. It's as bad now as it was then. It's no different. You know, these kids, nobody's screening them for dyscalculia. Nobody. Nobody. And yet kids are failing the same exams I did now because nobody's picked it up. And this is why I am massively passionate about screening for all neurodiverse conditions from the age of 5. Find out what's going on and don't let these kids be like me. A friend of mine actually pointed it out to me just recently. I'm old now, I'm 60. And it wasn't until 6 months ago that a friend of mine really got hold of me. She's a coach. And she said, basically, you've got to stop thinking of yourself as this really appalling secondary school rubbish person. She said, you're not. You're actually a grammar school girl who never got to go. And that's the first time that the chip was removed from my shoulder. I've walked around with this huge chip on my shoulder all my life because I didn't go to grammar school. I didn't do A-levels. I didn't go to university. And it wasn't until this friend of mine, who happens to be an exceptionally good coach, who said to me, you've got to stop thinking of yourself as the failure who went to that secondary school and as a grammar school girl who didn't get to go there through circumstances beyond your control. And that was literally 6 months ago. And it's changed the way I feel about myself in the last 6 months. So, yeah, I am more than passionate about kids being identified.
Yes, blimey. And that's that's a hell of a story, isn't it? That the sort of the fork in the road between the grammar and the sort of secondary school. And interesting you say about having good math results as a dyscalculic, yes, but the exam style didn't suit you. And
it's interesting because when I say to people I came first in maths out of 132 people in the second year, my first year at my secondary school, it's absolutely true. But because it was a very poor secondary school, when I say poor, a lot of the teachers couldn't even teach you to O-level. So my best subject was always drama. And I could only do CSE in drama because the teacher wasn't qualified to take me to O-level. It was that sort of school. It really held you back. So it was the sort of maths I've begun to realise I was very good and still am good at fractions, very good and still am at algebra. Don't ask me why. But if you ask me to this day what a logarithm is, I couldn't tell you. If my life depended on it, I wouldn't know. To me, it was a turquoise book that made no sense. It still doesn't make any sense what a logarithm is. So some of maths was beyond me, but some of it I really enjoyed, and some of it I was really good at, which I think is another thing that people don't realise about these conditions. This is why kids get told off in school for not trying. Because if you can be really good at, long divisions and things like that, I loved them. I could sit and do long divisions for pleasure. I love doing long divisions, and I love doing fractions, and I love doing algebra. But the other bits that to me were just a complete foreign language, made no sense whatsoever. That is why kids in class today get told off for not trying. Because they can do some bits and the other bits you're just not trying, rather than, that could be the way your brain is wired. So your brain's wired to do that, but it doesn't go that way. That's what I think teachers struggle to understand. If you can do, and I'm quite sure it's the same with dyslexia. I've worked with a lot of dyslexic clients. I don't have dyslexia myself. I do have dyscalculia. But I've worked with a lot of dyslexic clients, and that's what they found frustrating. But they can do certain things, and they can spell certain words and do certain things. But then they fail dismally at what other areas, and teachers accuse them of not trying or being lazy, when actually it's not. It's really that their brain is wired and can do certain things and just can't do certain other things.
Yes, definitely. And particular schools are a frustrating environment for that, because you can't tailor the environment. You just have to turn up and be like, I just need to force myself through it. And you're so exhausted by trying to force yourself through the bits that don't work, that when you get to the bits that you can do, you run out of steam.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I so wish, as I say, I'm a very old person now. I'm 60. This happened when I was 12. That's 48 years ago.
Yes.
You would think that something would have changed in 48 years. Very interestingly, I rang up my English teacher recently, only about 3 months ago. I thought the poor woman, may have passed, bearing in mind I'm 60, but no, she's alive. And this English teacher at my secondary school, she was wonderful, and she taught me in such a brilliant way. She also obviously realised I was ADHD and needed to keeping occupied, because we did Macbeth for 2 years, and I read Macbeth. I was in Mr. Macbeth for 2 years. She never took me off. She changed every other role, but she left me as Macbeth all the time. And when I rang her up, I wanted to say thank you, because one thing she did for me, she said she'd never done this before. I wrote an essay, and she actually said it to the class. She said, I want to read this essay out to you, because I've never given the mark. I want to give this mark to this essay before, but I want you, the class, to decide. And she read out my essay, and the whole class went A+. And she said, that's what I wanted to give it, but I've never given that mark before. And she gave me an A+. And she also told me I should be a journalist. And this was back, 100 years ago. But when I rang her a few months ago to say, I finally did get round, not to being a journalist, but I finally did get round to writing books. It took me till I was in my mid-50s, but I just wanted to thank you, because that comment you said about you should be a journalist, and it was exactly those words. It wasn't, I think, it was, you should be a journalist. I've never, ever forgotten that. And that kind of gave me, not confidence, but more like the knowledge that actually I did have it within me to write. I did have it within me. It just gave me that knowledge from somebody, clever enough to be an English teacher, that I should do it. And the interesting thing was, she told me that when she was back at that dreadful secondary school, she said, I was the only person, Sarah, who used to go on courses about this stuff. She said, I used to go on courses about dyslexia and these other ADHD and these other conditions. But she said, I could not get one of the other teachers to go with me. This was quite a big school. There was about 500, 600 girls in this school. And she said, back in those days, she said, nobody would come on those courses with me. But I used to go on courses for dyslexia and all these other conditions. And I thought, God, good on you, back in the middle 70s. She was going. But she couldn't convince anybody else. That was the fascinating bit. Out of, I don't know, there maybe were 50, 60 teachers in that school. Not one would ever go with her. Not one ever thought it was worthwhile, That's what's heartbreaking. But she did not inspire. She gave me the confidence to know that I could probably do it.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. You need people like that, don't you?
Oh, God, don't you? You so do. I found that when I was counselling. I am a qualified counsellor. I don't see clients hardly anymore because I'm just too busy. But when I was working with my teenagers, I loved and adored working with ADHD. The angrier and ruder and aggressive and hating their parents, the more of that, the better. I loved them. And I always used to do this with them and the young offenders I work with in prisons. The biggest thing you can do for them is give them the knowledge and the confidence to try and to know that they have choices. A lot of them feel that they don't have the choices. You know, they've got these conditions, they've been told they're dyspraxic or dyslexic, and they've got ADHD and they've got autism, they've got all that going on. And a lot of them think, well, that's me screwed then. You know, I'm not going to achieve anything. And I think the biggest thing I did for them was say, well, yeah, but look at Richard Branson. Number one, Richard Branson's dyslexic, ADHD, and he's been in prison. And look at him now. And there's thousands of those. There's thousands and thousands of high achieving people who've got 1, 2, 3, 4 neurodiversities, and it has not held them back. And that, for a lot of these kids that I was working with, was massive news, because they've got everybody in their life, from teachers, tutors, head teachers, form teachers, Senkos, all saying, oh, well, you'll amount to nothing. And if you don't get your maths GCSE, you might as well forget it, your life's over. And I'd say it's really not. You know, I got ungraded for my maths O level. It hasn't held me back. I've got businesses, properties, charities. I do loads of stuff. And I've still got ungraded for maths. It hasn't held me back. Yeah. And that, I think that for children, giving them the confidence to know that you can be absolutely dreadful at some things, absolutely appalling, rubbish, you know, the worst you can be at some things. It doesn't have to hold you back. You only have to be good at one thing. I always say this, one thing, just find that one thing, whether it's plumbing, pottery, whatever it is that you're passionate about, go for it, because that's what you'll be good at. And it doesn't matter if you got ungraded for maths, it's not going to hold you back. Yes. So that's how I used to work with my clients. And it's so important. But I didn't have anybody saying that to me when I was younger. I was just rubbish at a lot of things.
Yeah. So what did you get up to when you left school? Obviously, you alluded to failing some of the grades and bits and pieces. So what did you drop into?
What did I drop into? Well, I dropped into what my mother told me I had to drop into. I was accepted at the local, very, very good, another secondary school, but a very good one that specialised in the arts. And I was accepted to do A-levels in English, drama and theatre arts. But my mother wasn't having any of that. She didn't want me to do that. So she sent me to the local secretarial college, which I hated. I then went to work in London. When I was 17, 18, working in London as a secretary, everybody kept saying to me, you should work in advertising. I was like, should I? I don't even know what advertising. Oh, all right. And eventually I got a job for one of the biggest advertising agencies in the world at the time. I don't know where they are now, McCann Erickson. But at the time, they held all the big ads. We used to do the Esso Tiger ad, the Lloyd's horse ad, the Levi jeans ads, the Nescafe ads. That was my job, actually. I used to shine the coffee beans. So I don't know if you're old enough to remember, but when Gareth Hunt, Una Stubbs and Diane Keane used to do the shaking of the coffee bean, and the coffee beans would come down in the hand and there'd be 3 coffee beans, that was my job. I used to go and buy the coffee beans and shine them and oil them every day. So they were all ready. So I did work in advertising for a year and a half, and I absolutely loved it. But ultimately, I used to go into employment agencies, and I would look at these women sitting the other side of the desk going through all these jobs and helping people. This is where the ADHD compassion came out. I used to see all these people, you know, working and getting people jobs. And I think, I want to do that. I want to help people. I want to help people get jobs. So when I was 23, I went into an agency. They said, come and work for us. And that was my life. I spent my life doing recruitment and working and helping people get jobs. I absolutely loved it. So I spent most of my 20s, all of my 30s and my 40s working in recruitment. I had my own agency, of course, ADHD, set up my own business. We don't like working for other people. And I ran employment agencies very, very successfully. And I think I was successful, not because I'm any great salesperson, but because I really like helping people. So, you know, I really, really like helping people. So my biggest success, I'll tell you my biggest success. I had a girl ring me up on a Monday sort of lunchtime, and she was crying because she'd just been made redundant from a very good job. And she was crying. She was about 30, this girl. She was crying because on the Friday, she was due to move into her first house that she had bought with a mortgage and everything. Right? This was a Monday. She's made redundant. By the Wednesday afternoon, I'd got that girl another job on a higher salary than she'd been on. So by the time she moved in on the Friday, and she had to start the new job the following Monday, But that's the sort of thing that gave me my ADHD buzz, that gave me the adrenaline. So I was very lucky in that I avoided alcohol and drugs. Alcohol I did a bit in my 20s, but I largely avoided the things that gave you a buzz, because I got it from helping people exactly like that, that were in dreadful situations, that would come on the phone sobbing and crying, or, come into my office crying and all upset. And I just love nothing more than helping them and changing their life for them, So I did that for a very long time. And then in my late 40s, I thought, I've had enough of this now, bored. I'll train to be a counsellor. So I trained to be a counsellor when I was 49. And then qualified when I was same year I got diagnosed. So 2015, diagnosed that March, and qualified as a counsellor the November before.
So where does the volunteering work and working with homeless and offenders and things like that, where does that fit into that?
Oh my, okay.
Sort of life story.
That fits in beautifully. When I was in my early 20s and doing all this recruitment and earning lots of money and everything, I used to love going to the theatre. I'm a very big theatre person. And I used to go to the theatre loads and loads and loads. I used to go out twice a week. I'd finish work early on a Wednesday and go to a Wednesday matinee. Then I'd go to another show on the Saturday or Sunday. I was literally running out of West End shows to go to, because I used to go and see them all the time. And of course, when you walk around London, especially in those days, there was an awful lot of homeless people. And me, with my ADHD compassion that I had, I would always give them money. Or I know now that money's not great, because sometimes it means they're going to spend it on drugs. But in those days, I used to give them money. And I was giving them quite a lot of money. I mean, back in those days, I was giving them like 20 quid here and 20 quid there, and practically bankrupting myself. And one time I was sitting on the tube and I was looking up at the adverts, and there was an advert from the Big Issue. And it was advertising for people. It said, do you feel compassion for people? Do you care about people? Blah, blah, blah. And I thought, yes, all of that, big time. And it said, we are launching our very first ever Big Issue mentoring scheme. So I wrote down all the details. I applied and I got on it, on their very, very first mentoring scheme.
Nice.
Where I was matched with, how many did I work with? Several people. Then that was taken over by an organisation called the DePaul Trust, who are very, very big in the homeless world. And I was mentoring for them for about 7 years, loving helping these homeless people. I mean, some of them, one girl, for example, who I mentored, she had been told at school, you will end up on the streets. I mean, how inspiring is that?
Yes. Yeah.
She'd been told that she'll end up on the streets. So where did she end up? On the streets.
Yeah.
Of course she did. So when I met her, she had a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old, and I think she was 21. And her dream was to be a teacher. And if I tell you now, that girl has got a degree and is a teacher.
Oh,
and she's a wonderful mother of 4 children now. Absolutely wonderful, wonderful mother. Because again, all I did with her was say, well, you can be on the streets, but you've got a choice. If you want it, and with her, we had to find a college that had a creche. I said, let's break this down one by one. You want to go to college, you want to be a teacher. Fine. We need one with a creche, Yeah. And she said, I believe they exist. I said, right, okay, let's find one. And she found it, not me. She found a college with a creche, and she then went and did her A-levels and teacher training, and she's now a fully qualified teacher. So I worked with loads and loads and loads of homeless people, all of whom now I look back and think they're all ADHD. But with the DePaul Trust, they said to me, we want to challenge you a bit more. We think you've got more. How do you fancy working with ex-offenders? And I said, I'd love to. I'd love it. I'd love the challenge. So they introduced me to one, my very first boy. He was 31. He'd been in and out of prison constantly since he was 19. I look back now, and of course he was screaming ADHD, but this was years before I knew anything about ADHD. They just said to me, he's a really tough nut, a really difficult one to work with, but your challenge is to keep him out of prison for 6 months. So me up for the challenge, I managed it. It wasn't even difficult, to be honest. I managed it. I think probably because I think the thing I've always had is that I genuinely don't believe anybody is better than anybody else. So I don't treat anybody as if I'm better or they're better. We're all exactly the same, right from King Charles down to the bloke selling the Big Issue. No difference. We're all exactly the same. I've always treated people exactly the same. So I got on very well with him, kept him out of prison for 6 months. And then they said to me, right, we've never asked anybody to take a client on twice, but would you take him on and keep him out for another 6 months? Okay. So I took him on for another 6 months and I kept him out for a year. And that was where I got my passion for offenders, because I love a challenge. I love a challenge. So I then went into the prisons and I started off, because my background had been recruitment. The first prison I went to volunteer in, they said, would you work with the boys who were just about to be released? Because we have a 6-week course that prepares them for release. So it's all about doing their CV, doing an introduction letter, interview technique, all that sort of thing. And I said, I'd absolutely love to. And I did that for 18 months, only 1 day a week, but for 18 months. Absolutely loved every second of it. Found again with these boys and men. This was mostly boys in their 20s and early 30s I was working with in that prison. And again, the vast majority had come from dreadful backgrounds. They'd come from either the care system, they'd come from families where alcohol, drugs, drug dealing was the norm. There was only one boy who actually came up to me during my time there. To me, he said, Sarah, he said, I've got to be honest with you. He said, I'm the only person who shouldn't be in this prison. He said, I've got a really good family. I've got a mum and dad. I've got a sister and a brother. And I think one of them was a bank manager and one of them was something else professional. And he said, I didn't need to be here. He said, I can see why all these others have ended up here. It's very obvious why they're here. I shouldn't be here. And I said, well, don't beat yourself up about it. Just be grateful that you've got that great family to go out to and you've got that great, support and structure to go out to. And these poor people haven't. And he said, yeah, I know. I'm extremely grateful now for what I've got. So even he could see that most of these people, their life was kind of going in that direction, which is what we now call the school to prison pipeline. And they were all in it. They were all in that pipeline. So then from then on, I did that 18 months working with them one-to-one, helping with interview technique and CVs. And I soon realised they weren't going to get jobs. They're all the sort that, you looked at them the wrong way, they would tell you to F off. So I then started to talk to them all about self-employment and how they could run franchises and how they could be self-employed window cleaners, gardeners, all that sort of thing. And I just helped them with that. And it was while I was there that I thought, I need to do this properly. I need to train to be a counsellor. And that's what inspired me to train to be a counsellor. And I only ever did my counselling training knowing I wanted to work with offenders. That was the only reason I did it. So when I got to, I don't know how much you know about counselling, but in the last 2 years, you have to do a placement. And my boss at that prison, she actually said to me, come back here and do your placement. I said, I will with pleasure. I love this prison. I adored it. But when it came to it, the sort of counselling I was doing was considered not right for that prison. And now I know what I know. I totally agree. So I was left with the choice of Aylesbury young offenders. And I have to say, being hideously judgmental, I thought, oh God, stroppy teenagers. I just thought, if I have to, I will, because I'm going to do my placement in a prison come hell or high water. But working with young offenders, when I've been working with all these lovely 25, 28, 32-year-old men, didn't appeal to me at all. And then I walked into Aylesbury on the first day and I sat in front of my first 19-year-old young offender. And from that day to this, I have adored every young offender I have ever worked with. And they're my absolute favourite category of people to work with. I adore young offenders. Every single one.
What is it about them that really attracts you to them?
The sadness, the fact that they didn't need to be there. Most of them, nearly all of them, ADHD. All the ones I worked with, nearly all of them. Well, here's a statistic for you. In Aylesbury, over a year, I worked with 6 clients. 3 of those had been diagnosed as ADHD as children, but were not on medication. And of the other 3, 2 of them, I got diagnosed ADHD on the outside. It's only number 6, who I don't think probably was ADHD. I kind of lost contact with him, but that was 5 out of 6 that were ADHD. So most of them, it's the sadness that got me, the sadness, the waste. The fact that they didn't need to be there. If they'd had stronger parents, or in some cases, any parents, if they hadn't been in the care system, if they'd had parents like mine, who were like, you get in here, you do your own work, you do not move from that desk until you've done your own work.
Yes.
Then you come and have your tea, and you're in bed at 8 o'clock. That was my life. I had no choice. These boys, left to go off. One of them that I work with, aged 14, he was taken away for a week to be trained as a drug dealer. Aged 14. And I said, to him, I said, what did your mother say about that? He said, she didn't even know I wasn't there. She didn't give a care. Didn't care. She didn't know if I was in, out. Just carted off about 300 miles away to be trained as a drug dealer. And
nobody noticed. Nobody noticed. Yeah.
No, he never got told off. No, he just picked up back the next Saturday and cracked on selling drugs.
Jeez.
And it's the sadness of them. It's the fact that they've not had the positive input. They've not had the positive role models. They've not had somebody who cared enough. And this is why I've stayed in touch with loads of them on the outside, which doesn't make me terribly popular with the Ministry of Justice, but I don't care. I don't care because these boys need me. The ones without mums need me. A lot of them call me mum. And I'm fine with that. But because they don't have a mum. So if I need to be their mum, I'll be their mum. If I'm, and I am the person that says, don't you dare do that again. You're not going back to prison. You behave, you do this. And I've become some of their mums, which is a bit random, but that's what they need. They need somebody to tell them what's right and what's wrong. Because if nobody tells them and if nobody's giving them the right example, I've worked with boys whose parents and grandparents have been drug dealers. So if that's the family way, then that's what you carry on doing, isn't it? I've had boys from the age of 6 who were dropping off drugs for their father, doing drug drops. And that's what they know. So that's what they carry on doing. So they know no different.
Exactly. If their role models are showing them that's the way to run your life, then why would you question it?
Especially when it brings in so much money.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So dad's sitting at home on the sofa getting his sons to run off doing the drug deals and he's bringing in 10 grand a week. Why would the 6-year-old think, well, this is quite easy, quite good. Why wouldn't he think it's okay?
Exactly.
And it's terribly sad because the prison's a chock-a-block with people like that, people who've had no other example.
Yeah, definitely. Is that where ADHD liberty comes in?
Yes, it does. Massively.
And obviously the seed of that was planted in what you're describing. But what time?
Yes.
At what point do you think I'm going to push this into being a charity?
That's a very good question. I've never even thought of it. I think once I started counselling people and I realised that this was as big a problem, this sounds a crazy thing, but this is where in my 1% processing where I went, I realised I'd got to get to these boys before they were in prison. By the time they were in prison, the damage was done.
Yeah.
So I thought I've got to work with these kids on the outside and get to them young enough. And when I'm saying young enough, we could be talking 10, 11. I've worked with many kids of 10 and 11 who've been in trouble with the law. More commonly, 12, 13, 14, right? But it can be younger. And I wanted to get to these kids when they were younger and explain a couple of things. One, how horrific prison was. Because there's a bit of this still exists to this day and I don't understand it. There are people that come out of prison and say, well, it's all right, it's okay, it's quite cool, I've got this in there, I've got that in there. They have to do that to save face. They can't say, these are dreadful places, you get treated like dirt, you get locked up in your prison for yourself for 23 hours a day. The food is so inedible that you would choose not to eat it. You can only eat what you buy from the canteen at the end of the week. Sometimes you can't go out on visits because you're so scared you're going to be knifed. That's the reality of prison. Prison is a very scary, nasty place.
Yeah.
But to save face, the people coming out of prison have to pretend it's not that way. Oh, it's okay, mate. Yeah, I've had a client once years ago whose uncle was in prison, and the uncle used to phone up this client of mine and say, "Oh, it's not bad in here, mate. Go and punch a copper. Go and do something. Get yourself put inside. I'll be here. I'll look after you. We'll have a right laugh." And the mother. Absolutely, she kept saying to me, "For God's sake, what do I do?" I said, "Well, block the uncle's number for starters. Stop the uncle ringing." But I think the boy we were talking about there was only about 13, and yet the uncle was saying, "Go and do something to get put inside. It's not as bad as you think." Oh God, Whoa. It is. It is. So I thought, where did ADHD liberty come into it? Quite soon after I started counselling, I thought we need to help. We need to help everybody with ADHD and any of these neurodiversities, but we specifically need very specific help for people that are going down the addiction road, which is hugely connected to ADHD. and also people who are already down the offending road from a very young age. So I set up 2 separate companies. Head Stuff ADHD Therapy was for the therapy, bog standard therapy for everybody. And then Head Stuff ADHD Liberty was all about, addiction and crime. And then a few years later, somebody said, I can't even remember who now, you should turn it into a charity because then you'd be, you'd be eligible for grants and all sorts of other things. So we changed it into a charity very roughly 4 years ago. But Head Stuff ADHD Liberty has been helping those sorts of people with those sorts of issues for 8-9 years. And then it's been a charity for very roughly 4 or 5. And now we're very big. We're kind of known as the charity that our focus is the criminal justice system. That's what we're known for. And I'm very happy for us to be known as that charity. Yeah. We do fight for the people with the least voices. And the people with the least voices are the people who are homeless, who are, having some very, very serious and chronic severe addiction issues, and people who've been in prison, because they are the ones with the quietest voices. So we shout very hard for them. So that's kind of where it came from, the charity thing. But I've been involved in charitable work for 30 years, since I was literally 30 and I'm now 60. So, yeah.
Yeah. And what sort of things are you trying to put in place in the criminal justice system and ex-offenders?
Very, very, very easy what we're trying to put in place. We're trying to get everybody screened for ADHD and the coexisting conditions everywhere. So on induction wings in prisons, in youth offending services, especially because the younger we can pick up kids, the better. And also probation, because it's probation's job to stop people reoffending.
Yes.
If they are reoffending because they've got undiagnosed ADHD and they just can't stop, speeding or doing whatever they're doing to get their buzz, then we can, probation can pick them up. So let's take Birmingham Police as an example. We're dealing with 29, I think it is at the moment, police forces, but Birmingham, they're doing a brilliant thing. West Midlands Police, Birmingham Probation and Birmingham Youth Offending Services are all starting to screen at the same time so that they can prove how much ADHD is in YOS, how much is in probation and how much are they seeing in the police. So they're screening across the board. Greater Manchester Police, they've decided to do it differently. They've decided to start screening in the branch of theirs where they see most children, which thrills us because, the younger we pick these people up, the better.
Oh, most definitely.
Yeah, Greater Manchester Police have chosen to start in the particular station in their area where they see most children coming in. So people are doing it differently. Different police forces are doing it different ways. And we're very flexible on this. We're not dictatorial. Several police forces have said they want to start screening on their, I think they call it liaison and diversion. It's where people with any sort of addiction problems or, who come in drunk or come in with a serious habit, they are diverted to this service and they're going to start screening there because that's where they think most of the ADHD is. So different forces are doing it in different ways. And it's been really fascinating talking to all these police forces. One that really, really I loved talking to them because I'm a quarter Scottish, was Police Scotland. So I don't know if you know, but Police Scotland operate a bit differently. Police Scotland cover the whole of Scotland.
Yes. Yeah.
So we had this meeting with Police Scotland. This must be going back about a year. And there was about 8 of them, absolutely lovely men. And I thought, how am I going to bring up the fact that there's a big old addiction and alcohol problem in Scotland? They told me themselves they have horrendous suicide figures and death figures from addiction, horrendous. And I thought, how am I going to bring up the fact that this is going on in Scotland? And I think it's probably to do with a lot of undiagnosed ADHD, because every single client I've worked with in the last 10 years, I've asked them if there's any Scottish in their family, and only one person said no. Oh. Thousands said, yes, my mum, yes, my dad, yes, my granddad. So I've got a big belief that there's a big genetic link with Scotland and ADHD. Anyway, when I had this lovely meeting with Police Scotland, I was racking my brains. How am I going to bring this up without offending them? How am I going to do it? And I said, look, I don't want to offend anybody here, but I know that Scottish people and Irish people quite fond of I started it and they finished the sentence for me. They said, we know, trust us, we know. we've got major alcohol problems here. We've got major drug issues in Scotland, and we've got a major suicide. I think they said something like, don't quote me on this, but I think they said something like their suicide rate is the highest in Europe. It was a frightening figure, and they said, we firmly believe that is down to a lot of undiagnosed ADHD. So they finished the sentence for me, which was brilliant.
Yes.
And Police Scotland are going to start screening. They've got to. They've said, we've been instructed, basically, we've got to do something about these numbers. And we believe that undiagnosed ADHD could be the explanation for a heck of a lot of it, if not all of it. So we've got every police force we've spoken to. I could cry at this moment because they've all been so lovely. They've all been so grateful for what we're doing, because we don't charge anybody a penny. I spend all day long every day doing this. We don't charge anybody a penny. We give them all the screening tools. We give them what happens next. We advise people, and all of them are so lovely. And the reason for that, all the police officers we're talking to are ADHD themselves. And that's why they've picked up, all these people I'm picking up off the street, they're all like me. They can all see it, in the clients, they can see it.
It's the coin flip, isn't it? Are you the offender or the I suppose, the public face of justice? But which way is the ADHD push you?
Many of the officers I've spoken to have said I could so easily have gone down that route. I can see if I hadn't had the strong parents, hadn't been sent to boarding school, or hadn't, whatever, I could have gone down. They can see that they could have gone down that route. And interestingly, we're now, in the last 6-9 months, we're now getting approached from different countries, particularly Australia.
Really?
Australia. Yeah, I had a meeting yesterday with Queensland Police.
Okay.
And we now realise this screening for ADHD in police stations, which we thought was just a little thing that we were going to do with some police forces in the UK, that has already exploded, because it's nearly the whole of the UK we're dealing with now. There's pockets that we aren't, but we're going to talk to them. But most of the UK we're dealing with. But now suddenly approaching us, because we wouldn't have the gall to do this ourselves, but we wouldn't be poking our noses in, but we're getting contacted by a lot of police forces abroad, and all of them have told us there's no ADHD screening going on. So our little teeny weeny project that we started with the City of London Police, which was teeny weeny, we now actually think we're the first in the world. We've had people tell us we're the first in the world. We've had 2 people in America, separate American states, contact us and say, there's no ADHD screening going on here, and our problem is as bad as yours. But in America, they've said, we're going to have a bigger problem with it here, because they are so tough on crime in America. What would get a 20-year sentence here would get a 90-year sentence in America, for example. So they said, we're going to have a bigger battle getting people to realise that there might be a reason for this behaviour, because people will see it as an excuse for that behaviour. So, as I say, we have had contact from 2 different police forces in the States, but they've both said, we know it's going to be a much more difficult nut to crack. We're jealous, basically. They said, we're jealous of what you're doing, because we know it needs to be done here. And the Australians are wonderful. We've spoken to so many, we've had Melbourne Police on, Queensland Police, and they're all lovely, but they're saying, we're just following you. We love the UK. Whatever you're doing, we'll just follow you. We'll just do it. So we're sending everything over to them, and they're going to be starting to screen as well, which is amazing.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. Definitely. Wow. That is interesting, isn't it? I wonder, I heard some scary statistic with dyslexia that's nearly like 50% of inmates are dyslexic. Just in case school doesn't work for you, you're going to maybe turn to crime instead of starting businesses like that sort of knife edge with Richard Branson.
That dyslexic, I can guarantee you they're ADHD. I would put my life on it.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I've never met anybody with dyslexia who's not got ADHD. Never. And
maybe I should get checked then.
It's a challenge. I've got it out there. For the first person who comes to me who's dyslexic and not ADHD, bring them to me. I'll give them a prize. I'd love to meet them. I don't think they exist.
Oh, right. Well, but, I don't think I've got ADHD, so I could be wrong on that one.
Well, you might get my prize then, love, because I've been waiting for years to find somebody who doesn't have ADHD and is dyslexic. I've forgotten your question again. There we go. So I've gone off a tangent.
Well, I took you off on a tangent, so
did you?
it was fine.
Okay.
What I was doing is musing about the fact that 50% of something like 50% of prisoners are dyslexic, and then
correct. Yes, and I would say all those prisoners have got ADHD without a shadow of a doubt. I don't know if you probably know this figure. For many, many years, when I first came out of the prisons, which was beginning of 2016, they were putting out this figure that 1 in 4 inside prisoners got ADHD, and I was like, no. But nobody would have it, and they kept putting this 1 in 4 figure out. And every time I read it, my blood pressure would just like, not 1 in 4. It's most of them. Anyway, about 3 years ago, somebody called Dame Sally Coates was commissioned to do a report, I believe by the MOJ, and she did a report, and she said in her report, it is now not unreasonable to believe that at least 50% of the prison population are neurodiverse. So for Dame Sally Coates, she's getting closer. But you see, the thing is, they're basing that on people that have been diagnosed as children. They're not basing it on all the people who haven't been diagnosed. So once they start actually screening in the prisons, I think they are going to find the figure much nearer 80 to 90% is neurodiverse. And we will, of course, mention autistic people, because there are many autistic people in prison as well, but they're in there usually for different things. They're not in there for fighting, for drug dealing, GBH, ABH, attempted murder, all that sort of stuff. They don't tend to be in there for that. They tend to be in there for the crime where they've had to use their brain, because their brains work very well. In fact, I had a big meeting with the UK, what do they call themselves? They were basically the scamming and hacking team, which of course now most crime is cybercrime and online crime, and that is massive now, absolutely massive. They had begun to realize, this was a good year ago, I had this meeting, they had begun to realise that most of the people they were arresting were autistic. They'd realised that themselves, because these people have got very, very clever brains. And because they're wired differently, they can see the way around things and through things that other people just can't see. So there is a proportion of people in prison with autism, and there's also obviously a proportion who are both ADHD and ASD. You have got that. But really, the percentages, I would imagine you're looking autism maximum, this is just me saying this, maximum 10-15% in prison with autism, ADHD 85%. It's that, it's a cavernous difference. Because the ADHD natural ways of thinking, I don't know how much you know about this, but ADHD ways of thinking are, we're always best, we want everything our own way, we've got no patience, we want everything now, we push boundaries, we hate authority, we don't like being told what to do, we always think we know best, and the big killer, we get bored. So if you ask most of the boys why they committed their offences in prison, boredom is the number one thing. Boredom. I had nothing else to do. Just needed to get out and do something. And also we're impulsive. And the other killer for ADHD is that our brains don't naturally think of the consequence. So, I worked with one lovely boy. He wouldn't mind me talking about him in Portland prison. And he was in there for stealing his 1,000th car.
1,000th?
1,000th, yes. Number 1,000. He was about 26 at this point. And I said to him, be honest with me. I said, no judgment here whatsoever, but be honest with me. When you were just about to steal car number 1,000, did it enter your head that you might end up back in this place? And he thought about it, and he really thought about it. And he said, truthfully, no, Sarah, no. He said, because I walked past the car, and he said, I tried the door handle, as you always do. And I thought, well, no, actually, I don't always do. But perhaps you always do. Yeah, he always did. You always tried the handle. And he said it was open. And then he said, with his eyes as wide as saucers, he said, the keys were in the ignition. What else was I supposed to do? And that was his actual words. What else was I supposed to do? And of course, now my ADHD meds tucked inside my little I'm thinking of the consequences world, I would have thought, well, I don't really want to go back to prison, so I'll just leave that, slam the door and walked away. He couldn't, because they're not medicated. So what else could he do? He had to steal that car. It was on a plate as far as he was concerned. He had to steal that car and had to get arrested, and he had to go back to prison. He had no choice.
What a gift that owner
What? Yeah. I mean, idiot left the door open and the keys in it. I mean, really. But
lock your cars, people, because
yes,
that's the start.
Exactly. Because there are people that can't see an alternative if you leave your car door open and the keys in it. They think it's an invitation.
Yeah. And imagine that's like him throwing the keys to the sweet shop, is it, to somebody who's of that way inclined and doesn't think of the consequences? Like, oh my God, it's got the keys in.
Yeah.
This is my lucky day as the engine starts.
Absolutely. Yeah. And when I said to him, please just be honest with me, did it ever enter your head that what you were going to do might potentially bring you back here? And bless his heart, he really thought about it. A good couple of minutes he was silent. He went, honestly, no, because this is what happened. And then he told me the exact scenario. And he went, I never, ever thought that I'd end up back here. Just hadn't occurred to him at all. And that is 99% of the prison population, or maybe not 99, but most of them. That's their thinking. They don't think of the consequences.
Yes. It's very easy to think that people are rational actors in them situations, but they really are not.
Not when they're 18, 19, 20, 21. No, they're not.
No, definitely not.
No.
Okay, so I think I'm going to start winding the podcast up now. And every guest that comes to this podcast gets 3 rapid-fire questions from me.
Rapid-fire questions.
They don't need rapid-fire answers from yourself. And I'm going to tweak them because you usually ask them about dyslexia, but that's not necessarily your area of specialty. So what I'll do is let's fire into question number 1. So what prejudice you've had about ADHD that's been proven wrong?
Oh, okay. Oh, my God. How do you start? Probably that to have ADHD, you've got to be thick. A lot of people think that. I know, for example, somebody who's a scientist who's screaming ADHD, but she will not accept she's ADHD because she's a scientist. So she doesn't think scientists can have ADHD. So a lot of people, it's utter rot. On my team, I'm the thickest on my team. The rest of my team, they've all got degrees, masters, PhDs. A lot of them have got 2 degrees. They're very, very bright people. So I think the biggest prejudice is probably that ADHD people are A, thick, and B, lower class. Come from the lower classes, which is utter rot, because you can see it right through the class system. And I won't be specific, but you can see it right through the royal family as well. Riddled with ADHD, the royal family is. It's got nothing to do with class and nothing to do with lack of education. You could be incredibly bright and have ADHD. So that's the biggest prejudice, that you've got to be thick and common to have ADHD.
Yes. Okay. And that is. And it's interesting in neurodiversity in general. Brains don't understand the class system until they're born into it and raised into it. So if you got a neurodiversity, that's the hard way.
Absolutely, yeah. But it's fascinating. As I say, I do know some people who are very, very bright and just refuse to be, because they know me and I'm a bit gormless and a bit dyspraxic and a bit clumsy and and they think that's ADHD. And they think, well, I'm classy, I've got a lovely home and I'm drinking 2 bottles of wine a night, but I can't possibly have ADHD because I'm so not like you.
Yes.
And they think that, but no, they're very wrong.
They are very, very wrong.
Every type of person. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So rapid fire question number 2. If an alien landed and you had to describe ADHD to them, how would you do it?
I would say it's a different brain. It's a brilliant brain. It's no less brilliant than a neurotypical brain, but it's wired differently and it reacts differently. It has things that it's extremely good at and things that it probably isn't so good at, but it's basically a different wiring. And we have a different brain. And in my personal view, it's a better brain because we're more interesting and we're not boring. But I would tell the alien that we are not less than, we are at least as good as, if not better than, your average neurotypical. That's what I would tell an alien. I'd sell us well.
Yeah, why not? Okay, and the final question is rapid fire set. And seeing as this is the Dyslexia Life Hack show, what is your favourite ADHD life hack?
Oh, that's a blooming good question. I think because I wasn't diagnosed till I was nearly 52, I had put so many coping strategies in place, if that's what we're talking about. So many things. Life hack. I did think of a brilliant one the other day that I do, and I thought, I bet a lot of people don't do this, and I thought of it, but of course I've forgotten it because that's ADHD. I, for me personally, the only way I manage to run my life is with the assistance of alarms and a bloody good diary. If I don't write everything, literally, if I don't write things down, so sitting literally opposite you now is this a post-it note? Actually, post-it notes. That's going to be my best life hack. Post-it notes, because I write everything on a post-it note, and then when I leave this room, I will take the post-it note with me. So post-it notes, because they can travel with you, they're terrific. And then when you've done whatever you needed to do, you can screw it up and chuck it and get rid of it very easily. So I probably spend a fortune on post-it notes, but I don't care, because that way, whenever I'm on a meeting or anything like this, if you'd said, Sarah, you've got to remember to do this, I would have jotted it down on this post-it note, and that would mean it would get done. If it wasn't written down, it would almost definitely get forgotten. Almost definitely.
Yeah.
So for me, it's writing things down, always having a very good diary, and always having post-it notes handy. That, for me, that's what works. That's the only way I can control my life. People think I'm very organised, but I'm not.
Yes. Not organised, but good systems. Yes.
Yes. But because I didn't know till I was nearly 52. So you just find ways, don't you, that work for you. I soon realised that I couldn't remember anything, so I had to write it down. Yeah.
Definitely. Okay, then. So before we sign off, Sarah, is there anything you'd like to add, and where can people find you?
Oh, okay. Well, people can find me on the website. The easiest one to remember is the www.adhdliberty.org. That's the easiest one to remember. There's a contact form on there. I will just say we do a lot of representing neurodiverse people in court now. I'm an expert court witness myself, and we've got other expert court witnesses. So if people are in trouble with the law, this is my area of passion. If anybody's got a child or a husband or whatever that's in trouble with the law, get on that website, because you can contact me via there. We've got brilliant court witnesses, not just me. We've got another one who's a doctor and a psychologist, and we've got psychiatrists. We've got the whole shebang. We've also got ADHD and ASD solicitors. So we've got all the legal teams, that can help you if you are in any sort of trouble. So ADHD Liberty is the easiest website to find me. But if you're looking for counselling, coaching, then it's Head Stuff ADHD Therapy. That's where you'll find I think they're the best, because they're all qualified counsellors and they're fantastic. And a ton of them are dyslexic. We have, dyslexic specialist tutors, dyslexic counsellors, dyslexic coaches. So we do cover the full range, the full rainbow of all the neurodiversities. We love them all.
Yes. Cool. Okay, well, that just leaves me to thank you very much for taking the time to come on the podcast.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
No problem at all. And I want to thank everybody else for taking the time to listen. And I'll speak to you in the next episode. Goodbye for now.